We are now live, Mayor Vernon.
Good evening, everyone. It's now 6:30 p.m. and I'll declare this ordinary council meeting of the town of Victoria Park open. I'd like to begin with an acknowledgement of country. Nunjarapan Wajak Nunga, Wujak Yakin Nijabilya Barduk. I am honoured to be standing on Wajak Nunga country on the banks of the Swan River. Nan Kadach Nunga Mort, Ken Kadak Nija Wajak Nunga Buja. Nan Kadach Nija Nunga Brudia Kora, Yaye, Order, Balapan Mordich Nunga Kadajan Mort, where Buja Yaye. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and respect past, present, and emerging leaders, their continuing cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship with the land, which continues to be important today. Nan Yunka Balapan Nunga Brodia, where Mort Nija Buja. I thank them for the contribution made to life in the town of Victoria Park and to this region. Item 2 of our agenda is announcements from the presiding member. 2.1, recording and live streaming of proceedings in accordance with clause 39 of the Town of Victoria Park Meeting Procedures Local Law 2019. As the presiding member, I hereby give my permission for the administration to record proceedings of the meeting. This meeting is also being live streamed on the town's website. By being present at this meeting, members of the public consent to the possibility that their image and voice may be live streamed to the public. Recordings are also made available on the town's website following the meeting. 2.2 is public question and statement time. There are guidelines that need to be adhered to in our council meetings, and during question and statement time, people speaking are not to personalise any questions or statements about elected members or staff or use any possible defamatory remarks. In accordance with clause 40 of the Town of Victoria Park Meeting Procedures Local Law, the person addressing the council shall extend due courtesy and respect to the council and the processes under which it operates, and shall comply with any direction by the presiding member. A person present at or observing a meeting shall not create a disturbance at a meeting by interrupting or interfering with the proceedings, whether by expressing approval or dissent, by conversing, or by any other means. For this electronic meeting, registrations to attend the meeting were required to be made online. Questions and statements that were received by members of the public prior to the meeting and who are not in attendance will be read by myself as the presiding member, and a relevant senior staff member will be called on to provide answers if required. Questions and statements related to an agenda item will be considered first. All those dealing with matters of a general nature will be considered in the order in which they have been received. If we do have a number of people attending our online meeting as members of the community, we will be limiting questions to 3 per person and statements to 2 minutes each. However, if there are not sufficient people in attendance that we need to keep to those strict limits, we'll otherwise permit more questions and more statement time to be made. In accordance with clause 56 of the town's meeting procedures local law 2019, both elected members and the public when speaking are not to reflect adversely on the character or actions of elected members or employees. We'll now come to item 2.5 on the agenda, which is the Mayor's report. So this ordinary council meeting is being held by electronic means pursuant to a determination and authorisation that I made under Regulation 14D of the Local Government Administration Regulations 1996, having regard to the continuing state of emergency, the escalation of community transmission of COVID-19 occurring since 17 May. It's a council meeting which continues to pose a risk to the health and safety of elected members, town staff and the public from attendances at in-person meetings. Do have a quick congratulations to make. Congratulations to 4 members of our local Victoria Park Xavier Hockey Club, Jane Claxton, Carrie Somerville, Alicia Power and Georgia Wilson, who were selected for the Hockey Roos team to represent Australia at the Commonwealth Games in England in July, which is an amazing achievement. Not many local clubs can boast having 4 members of their team selected to represent Australia in the Australian women's hockey team. So that's great news. Unfortunately, I now do have a veil to give, which is sad news for our community. I am sad to report on the passing of David Cran, a long-time resident of the town who died on the 24th of May this year after a long illness. Mr. Cran had a lifelong involvement in the theatre in Western Australia, principally with the Patch Theatre, where he worked as a producer, a director and an actor in theatre productions from the 1960s to the 1980s. Mr. Cran also had a great passion for history. He established Historic Victoria Park Incorporated, and he amassed a significant collection of memorabilia from his career in the arts and about Victoria Park, which was on display at his home. In 2014, Mr. Cran presented the council with a framed photograph of the 11th Battalion Australian Imperial Force taken in 1915 in Egypt, which proudly hangs to this day in the entrance to the town's administration building. Mr. Cran took a keen interest in the business of council. He was a regular attendee at council meetings and a regular correspondence by letter with myself after I became mayor. And since very few people write me letters, I very much enjoyed receiving Mr. Cran's letters. I will always remember Mr. Cran's special memorial at the town's annual Anzac Day dawn service in honour and memory of all the horses that were lost during the Great War. On behalf of the council and the town of Victoria Park, I extend our sincere condolences to his family and friends on his sad passing. I'll now proceed with the remainder of the Mayor's report from May through to yesterday. On the 21st of May, I attended the President's Ladies' Lunch and Game Day at the Perth Football Club at Lathlane Park. Sadly, it wasn't Perth Football Club's day, but I'm sure better days are ahead. On the 22nd of May, together with Councillors Karimi and Hendricks, I attended the town's Sporting Walk of Fame awards ceremony, where we inducted Sue Hillier for squash, Stuart Dunham for triathlon, and Joshua Hoffer for swimming into our Hall of Fame, and unveiled their stars on the boardwalk entrance to the Aqualife. On the 23rd of May, I attended the Kaleidoscope Mentoring Program 2022 graduation ceremony, hosted by the City of Canning at the Hillview Multicultural Community Hub in Bentley. It was a great opportunity to see firsthand how this inspiring program is assisting individuals from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds to access the networks needed to find employment in Western Australia. Amongst the graduates of the program were residents of our town. On the 26th of May, I chaired a Mindarie Regional Council meeting and subsequent budget workshop. On the 26th of May, I officially opened Biddy Walk, which is the upgraded right-of-way 52 outside or located next to the IGA in East Victoria Park, as part of an evening event for our community to celebrate National Reconciliation Week. We also launched the community consultation for our town's new Reconciliation Action Plan. Special thanks to Councillor Jesbyn Karimi for being the MC on the night, and to Councillors Hendricks and Devereaux for joining in the celebrations with me. On the 28th of May, I spent the afternoon helping the town staff at the annual Urban Forest at Home project. We gave out, I think, almost 1,000 trees and many more shrubs to community members for planting at their home. And Councillors Ife, Hendricks and Devereaux also helped out throughout the day. On the 30th of May, I joined members of the Old Burswood Neighbourhood Watch Group for their monthly meeting to discuss issues such as street lighting, CCTV and improving safety in the Burswood area. On the 1st of June, I joined the mayors of the City of Fremantle, Joondalup, Armidale and Subiaco for a corporate breakfast panel discussion on planning and development challenges in our local areas, which was hosted by the Property Council of Australia and facilitated by Business News WA. On the 3rd of June, the CEO and I had our monthly meeting with Hannah Beasley, the member for Victoria Park, where we discussed principally funding for McCallum Park Active Zone, the zoning for Miller's Crossing in Carlisle, and the Optus Stadium train station moving to a 7-day-a-week train station. On the 6th of June, I was the guest speaker at the Swan Care annual WA Day dinner, which was hosted by the Bentley Park Social Club Committee, and that was a great evening. On the 9th of June, the CEO, the Chief Operating Officer, and several town staff met with Rhys Whitby, MLA, the Minister for the Environment, out at the Jerderup bushland so that we could showcase our urban forest program, our restoration of the Jerderup bushland, the seed propagation program, and importantly, our newly minted plans for the restoration of the Kent Street sandpit site. And we discussed opportunities for future collaboration with the WA government in all of those matters. So looking forward to a future update there. On the 11th of June, Councillor Hendricks and I joined the Victoria Park Xavier Hockey Club at Fletcher Park for Hockey Australia's announcement of the Hockeyroos team for the Commonwealth Games in England next month, where, as I mentioned at the outset, 4 members of the hockey club were named in the Hockeyroos team. On the 13th of June, I opened the first of the town's homelessness policy review workshops hosted by Shelter WA and attended by key stakeholders providing services to people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness. Councillor Hamer joined me in participating in that workshop, and Councillors Ife, Devereux and Hendricks attended the second workshop on the 15th of June. On the 14th of June, the CEO and I met with John Carey, the Minister for Local Government, Hannah Beasley, our local member, and Andrew Valder, one of the founders of Garage Sale Trail and Grow It Local, to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the National Garage Sale Trail, with the town being one of the first local governments in WA to become a supporter. The Garage Sale Trail is Australia's best pre-loved opportunity to recycle and reuse and rehome previously loved items. It's on again in November this year, operating both as a virtual and an in-person event. And Andrew Valder and I also took the opportunity that we missed out on last year due to COVID interrupting his travel plans for us to promote the Grow It Local and Free Seed program that the town participates in annually, which is another great event. On the 15th of June, the CEO and I attended a meeting of the South East Corridor Councils Alliance hosted by the City of Armidale, where the topics included the impact of Metronet railway upgrades along the Armidale line, urban forest funding, which all of our councils are keen on progressing with the state government, and also developing our first strategic plan for the Secca Alliance, which will be coming to councils in the not too distant future. On the 18th of June, I held Share with the Mayor at the library, where I was fortunate to talk to local East Victoria Park residents about residential parking permits, the Atwell Street Local Centre Revitalisation Project, and representatives of the Friends of Jerderup Bushland about some of their future projects. And yesterday, the 20th of June, I had the pleasure of attending a committee meeting of the Southern Districts Band, which comprises the Town of Victoria Park Brass Band and the Swing Shift Big Band, to discuss ways that the town can work more closely with its officially appointed band at future events. So we'll now move on to item 3 in the agenda, which is attendance. In attendance, we have a somewhat reduced number of elected members tonight. We have from the Banksy Award, Deputy Mayor Anderson, Councillor Devereux and Councillor Hendricks. From the Jarrah Award, Councillor Hamer, Councillor Ife and Councillor Karimi. From the staff, we have in attendance the CEO, Mr. Valletta, the Chief Operations Officer, Ms. Adams, the Acting Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Ellis, Chief Community Planner, Ms. Martin Good, the Manager of Development Services, Mr. Cruikshank, the Manager of Governance and Strategy, Ms. Brajanovic, Manager of Property Development and Leasing, Mr. Denham, our Acting Manager of Finance, Ms. Ursich. Our Minutes Secretary is Ms. Horner, and we have 2 meeting support tonight from Ms. Louise and Ms. Higham. We do have apologies from Councillor Vicky Potter, and we also have Councillor Luana Alessandro on approved leave of absence. So we now move to item 4 on the agenda, declarations of interest. Mr. CEO, do we have any declarations of interest, please?
Yes, we do, Madam Mayor. Item 12.2, Councillor Wilfred Hendricks, financial interest part owner of a property on Albany Highway. Improvements would increase the value of his property. Item 12.4, Councillor Wilfred Hendricks, impartiality interest, as he's a member of the Rotary Club of Victoria Park, which runs events in the town. Item 12.5, Mayor Karen Vernon, impartiality interest, as she's the owner of a property listed in the Heritage Survey. However, that property is not the subject of the recommendation. Item 13.2, Councillor Jessie Hamer, impartiality interest. He knows the owner of Sonder Cafe and is a regular customer and has received an email from Trent Will on behalf of the applicant about the proposal. Item 13.2, Anthony Valletta, impartiality interest, as he knows the property owner and has spoken to him about the proposal. Item 13.2, Councillor Wilfred Hendricks, impartiality interest, as he's had previous contact with the owner and has been contacted by the owner regarding this item. Item 15.2, Councillor Wilfred Hendricks, an impartiality interest, as he's a member of the Rotary Club of Victoria Park, which hires the reserves in the town. Item 15.3, Councillor Wilfred Hendricks, an impartiality interest, as he's a member of the Rotary Club of Victoria Park, which runs events on parks in the town. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. I'd like to add to the declarations of interest with one of my own for item 13.2 to say that I have an impartiality interest on the basis that I have received 2 lots of correspondence from the applicant, developer, proponent for that particular item. Are there any other elected members who have declarations of interest they would wish to make that haven't already done so? Councillor Karimi.
Thank you, Mayor Vernon. I too would like to raise an impartiality interest for item 13.2 because I too have received emails from the applicant and the applicant's legal representation. I'll send that through now. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Karimi. Deputy Mayor Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor Vernon. I too would like to put forward an impartiality for 13.2 in regards to contact with the applicant through emails. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ife.
Thank you, Mayor Vernon. I've also received email correspondence from the applicants for 13.2, so I will also declare a conflict of interest, an impartiality interest.
Thank you. Any other declarations of interest that anyone wishes to make that hasn't already done so? No, in that case, please just a gentle reminder for elected members, if there is an interest that you consider that you need to declare and you haven't done so, you do need to do it orally in the meeting before the item comes up for consideration. And Councillor Hendricks, noting that you've declared a financial interest in one of the items on the agenda tonight, 12.2, we will be asking you to leave the room at the appropriate time before that matter is considered. Thank you. So we now move on the agenda. Item 5 is public question time. And we do have some pre-sent through questions, but I will just ask officially, because I'm just going to have a quick look on the participant list. Perhaps I might direct that question to our meeting support person. Ms. Louise, do we have any members of the public who have registered to be in attendance at tonight's meeting or who are already in the electronic meeting room?
Only Mr. Trent will, and I don't see him listed as amongst those particular questions, Mayor Vernon.
No, thank you. Mr. Will is here to do a deputation, which is a separate matter. So thank you for that. All right, so on that basis, I'll now proceed to deal with some of the questions that were pre-submitted ahead of tonight's meeting. So the first question relates, is from, just double checking, yes, none of the questions received relate to items that we'll be deciding tonight. No, that's exactly right. So we'll deal with these general questions in the order in which they're received. So the first question is from Eleanor Brinseri. And she writes, question is in relation to Council Resolution 159 of 2021, whereby right-of-way 33 was placed on the nominal list of capital works for the 2021-22 financial year. The members of the right-of-way 33 collective, Ceres Lane, would like to know why there has been a delay on beginning capital works, what is being done to resolve this delay, and when can we expect capital works to begin on the right-of-way 33 upgrades. I'll direct that question to our Chief Operating Officer, Ms. Adams.
Thank you, Mayor Vernon. So through the chair, we acknowledge there has been a delay, and that was due to resourcing challenges across the industry. And the tendering process was undertaken earlier this calendar year. Town staff are reviewing the best way of delivering those works, and it's anticipated that the project will commence in late 2022. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. The next question, there's two of them, or three of them, so I'll do them separately. These are from Graham Thurstat. The first question is, what is the annual cost, being direct labour, contract labour, plant and hire, depreciation of plant and equipment and staff administration, to maintain the grounds surrounding the town's administration building? Direct that question to Ms. Adams.
Thank you. Through the chair, the administration area on the outside of the building is maintained at an annual cost of $57,000, and Memorial Park, which is adjacent to the administration building, is maintained at an annual cost of $43,000. And these are maintained at the same time with the same resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. Second question from Mr. Thurstat. The town and its contractors have caused damage to a number of properties along Harvey Street whilst replacing sections of the footpath. While some of the damage has been repaired, repair work is still incomplete in its entirety. To date, there have been over 11 pages of emails, 4 site meetings, and an undisclosed number of internal meetings regarding this damage. What is the forecast cost of repair work, including administrative costs, and when will these costs be incurred by the town or the town's contractor? Direct that question again to Ms. Adams.
Thank you. So through the chair, there's a number of questions there. The first one relates to the repair work. So a section of new footpath in front of number 52, which is still cracked, that still has to be repaired by the contractor. And there's another section of path adjacent to a development site, and that'll be replaced after the development's completed. And so there's no further works planned in that area. So the contractor, in terms of costs, the contractor will be repairing those without any additional charges to the town, and there is not expected to be any further costs incurred by the town. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. The last question from Mr. Thurstat. Has the town signed off on this work with the contractor, and if so, when and why? Direct that question back to Ms. Adams.
Through the chair, as per my previous response, the works have not yet been completed. So once those sections of cracked path are completed and replaced and inspected, then the work will be considered completed. That's satisfactory. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. The next questions, there's a series of them, so I'll go through them one by one. The first question is, this is from the Ratepayers Association of Victoria Park. At the May Ordinary Council meeting, the council were advised in the officers' report that they were voting to advertise differential rates that would see a 4.6% increase across all categories. The figures that were voted on and subsequently advertised amounts to 5.7% across almost all categories. Based on the advertised figures, please advise what the actual rate increases would be across each category, including the waste levy, residential minimum, residential general, non-residential minimum, non-residential general, vacant minimum, vacant general. Direct that question to the Acting Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Ellis.
Thank you, Mayor Vernon. And I'll just note, I am dealing with a stubborn cough. So if I stop talking at any point and go silent, I'll deal with that and come back to the question. But in answer to your question through the chair, based on what was proposed at the May OCM, the following average increases were for residential minimum, 5.76, for residential general, 5.71, for non-residential minimum, 5.79, for non-residential general 5.66, for vacant minimum 5.75, and for vacant general 5.73. Those figures were identified to be incorrect and is one of the reasons why the budget document was pulled for this evening. They will be updated and brought back to Council in July.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. The next question from the Ratepayers Association reads, please confirm that residential properties with a gross rental value between 12,000 and 15,000 will be subject to rate increase above 10% and as high as 14.4%. Well, I'm not sure that we're in a position to answer that question until such time as the budget is actually adopted. Mr. Ellis, direct that question to you.
As you identified, Mayor Vernon, the figures that are being discussed were in the draft budget, which is not for consideration. They'll be updated and brought back to Council in July.
Thank you. Next question is, what is the benefit to ratepayers in having a separate waste levy? Mr. Ellis?
As part of local government reform, there is consideration to make it mandatory. However, it's not at this stage. For the town staff considering recommending that to provide for increased transparency for council and for ratepayers to be able to assess value for money between local governments.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. The next question from the Ratepayers Association is, will the waste levy apply to non-residential property? Direct the question back to Mr. Ellis.
Not as a part of the draft annual budget. It won't be recommended this year, no.
Thank you. The next question says, according to the information that was used to formulate the draft budget, how many of the rateable residential properties in the town have a gross rental value of less than 18,500? Direct that question to Mr. Ellis.
Thank you. There are 11,694 properties that have a GRV less than 18,500. Of which 1,604 are on the minimum rate based on 2022-23 figures.
Thank you. The next question is, at the agenda briefing forum on 7 June, the town advised that they advertised the intention to levy differential rates in the West Australian on Thursday, 19 May, because, and I quote, over the past year, there has been a change in community newspaper delivery with the Perth Now publication, and that advertising in the Thursday West Australian, quote, allowed larger coverage and for a fast publication as soon as the decision was made. If the town believes that Thursday West Australian has better coverage than Perth Now, then why does the town continue to publish other public notices in Perth Now? Mr. Ellis, is that a question for you?
I have an answer that I can provide.
Thank you.
And that is that the balance that the town looks at is that Perth Now has a much longer lead time for advertising than the West does. The West is able to place a public notice with a day's notice, and from memory, Perth Now is closer to a week. So depending on the notice in question and the amount of lead time we have, a value assessment will be made on the best place to place that notice.
Thank you. The next question from the Ratepayers Association says, to support the town's claim that the Thursday West Australian has a larger coverage, can the council estimate the number of ratepayers in the town who subscribe to the Thursday edition of the West Australian? Look, I'll answer that question and say, no, the council can't estimate the number of ratepayers who subscribe to the West Australian, and even assuming that we could estimate the number of ratepayers who subscribe to the West Australian, we couldn't estimate the number of ratepayers who read the West Australian despite their subscription to it. The next question from the Ratepayers Association says, in May 2021, the council deferred its decision to advertise its intention to advertise differential rates until it had been presented with a draft budget. The Mayor made several posts on the Ratepayers Association Facebook page stating, and I quote, "What town staff think is appropriate is subject to council's oversight. This month we voted not to advertise until staff present the whole draft budget first, something they should have done before presenting this item onto the May agenda. Council did its job in governance oversight at the May meeting," unquote. In seeking to provide proper insight and governance, why then did the council this year vote unanimously to advertise rates without first receiving the whole draft budget? I will answer that question. Council didn't do that. Council did receive the whole draft budget before deciding to advertise differential rates. That is the conclusion of the questions that were pre-registered. Now move to item 6, public statement time. There were no statements that were pre-submitted. So move now to item 7 on the agenda, which is confirmation of minutes and receipt of notes from any agenda briefing forum. The recommendation is that Council 1 confirms the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on 17 May 2022. Second, receives the notes of the agenda briefing forum held on 7 June 2022. 3, receives the notes of the Access and Inclusion Advisory Group meeting held on 9 March 2022. 4, receives the notes of the Lathlane Park Advisory Group meeting held on 10 March 2022. And 5, receives the notes of the Urban Forest Strategy Implementation Working Group meeting held on 21 March 2022. Elected members, you need to use your electronic voting. Can I call please for a mover and a seconder for the recommendation, please? Moved Councillor Ife, seconded Councillor Hendricks. Is there any dissent? There being no dissent, I declare that carried unanimously. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is item 8, presentation of minutes from external bodies. The recommendation is that Council 1 receives the minutes of the South East Metropolitan Zone meeting held on 20 April 2022, and 2 receives the minutes of the Mindarie Regional Council meeting held on 26 May 2022. Can I call please for a mover and a seconder for that recommendation? Moved Councillor Ife, seconded Councillor Devereux. Is there any dissent? No, there being no dissent, declare that carried unanimously. Thank you. Now move to item 9, which is presentations. So 9.1, petitions, we have none. 9.2, petitions, presentations, we have none. 9.3 is deputations, and we have received a request for a deputation. So the recommendation is that Council receives the deputation from Mr. Trent Will and Mr. Mark Irix regarding item 13.2, proposal to dispose of portion of Reid Park by lease. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please, for the recommendation that we permit the deputation? Moved Councillor Karimi, seconded Councillor Hamer. Is there any dissent? No, there being no dissent, declare that carried unanimously. Thank you. So we will now hear our deputation. So I am aware that Mr. Will was in the meeting room, and I note that the recommendation did actually refer to Mr. Irix as well. But I am assuming, given that only Mr. Will is in the electronic meeting room, that he is the only one presenting the deputation. So Mr. Will, the rules for deputations are you have 10 minutes and you can commence your deputation anytime you are ready.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And just confirming, I have in the room with me Mr. Eriks as well. We're just signed onto one device. Sorry, thank you. And Mr. Eriks will sort of largely be speaking tonight, but just again, wanted to reinforce that we are supportive of the officer's recommendation, and we just have a few brief comments to make about the background to the proposal and what really led us to this point. So I will hand over to Mark to discuss that.
Good evening, Mayor and councillors. I just wanted to give a bit of a background. I'm pretty passionate about this, the park and the building and what we're doing there, and I just wanted to give a bit of a background of why I'm so passionate and where I'm coming from with all of this. So I bought the building in 1999, April 99, and I remember standing in the park as in my late 30s and looking at the park and looking up at the building and thinking, you know, I'm a bit of a dreamer. I always have been, always will be. Thinking I'm going to do something with that building. I'm going to turn it from what it is today into something big, and I didn't know what it was and didn't know how I was going to afford it, but I managed to buy it, and that's another story in itself. I had no idea the problems, why it hadn't sold. There were people living in the building. There were people living under the building. There was, it took me quite a while to get them out of there. And once I got them out of there and thought my problems were over, I realized that there were a few people living in the park, and the ones that were living in the building ended up in the park, and we had a major drug problem and antisocial problem there for quite a while. So over the next couple of years, it was quite simple. No member of staff under any circumstances were to walk through that park without at least another member of staff. And if someone needed to walk to their car, it would be 3 people going and 2 people coming back. That's how bad it was. So it's nothing like that now. And the impetus for change was, so I think we put up with that. And I would have staff walk through the office, both stories, and see people staring at the window, you know, talking about what's happening in the park. And I would say, guys, just phone the police. I mean, just get on with it. You know, don't worry about it. Don't let this spoil your life, you know. But in 2000, in fact, the top floor of the building I never really used. Easy Fleet, which is my company, took up the whole bottom floor, and I used the top floor for 40 trampolines. And what we did with that was I had a lot of staff, and if any member of staff got upset about something or was suffering a bit of mental health issues, I just say, go upstairs and jump in the trampolines. And we had those there for many, many years. It was a bit of a thing in our industry that we had a bit of a reputation for. I decided in 2016 to build a decent gym for them on the ground floor, and we moved upstairs. And it was then that I was first got the whole idea of you know, doing something around health. So we had the gym for about a year. It was incredible the difference that made to the park. We ended up doing yoga sessions and gym sessions down in the park, and it totally enlivened the park. And I'd start at that stage, used to phone council and say, oh, you know, can we have the mowed or whatever? They were mowing it anyway, but it seemed to be, there was more emphasis on, you know, doing something around there. But the community garden had gone in that stage, so it was being looked after a lot better anyway. But in 2016, I had a massive heart attack, and I decided to retire from the workforce. And I said if I survived it, I would turn the whole building into a community-based centre which, you know, dealt in anything to do with wellness. I had the dream to do that, but I had no idea what to put in there. So we went out to the community, and if anyone had an idea, they had the passion, they had the ability, they had the time, and they had the commitment. I had the money, so I would put them in. So every business in that building now is owned by someone who come up with an idea to put their wellness idea, because as much as I wanted a wellness centre, I didn't know exactly what to put in there. So we now have certainly one of Australia's recognised award-winning wellness centres in there. And the latest thing to go in there, of course, was the cafe, which is happens to be owned by my daughter, my stepdaughter. And I didn't realise how much the community appreciated all of this until the last 3 years, when, of course, when she says to people, my dad owns the building, they want to meet with me and they say, look, we've lived here for 20 years, 30 years, 17 years, 5 years, whatever. What you've done to this building is just, it's improved our life. We belong to the yoga and the Pilates and the whatever, and your Happiness Co. And we just love living here more than we ever did, and we feel safe in the park. And so I just, just love what we've been able to do there and how the park fits in with it. So it's really the results of comments that come from the local people who visit, which is the local members, or the local residents who stand at that rail on the ramp going up into the building, have their coffee looking over the park, and they're the ones who come up with the idea of putting something there where they can sit. And it sort of started from there, and it's been going for a while now, and we've sort of got where we are now. But the park is, I believe, a significantly improved facility now that we overlook it, and that we run sessions in there. And I mean, it was always a beautiful park. I've been in that building now for 23 years, and there haven't been many of those days in those 23 years where I haven't spent time in the building. I mean, it's my life. And just what the things that we would like to, continue to do in the park, we'll just keep growing. And as people come up with ideas, I'll support them. And I just love it. And I just wanted to share that passion with you guys. So thank you.
Thanks, Mark. And just to add to what Mark is saying, yes, there is an element of this proposal that will directly benefit the cafe, but we really think the community benefits derived from this are significant and bona fide. And as Mark has described, Sonder is a local cafe. The operators are friendly. They talk to their customers, and the vast majority of customers are locals as well. And the feedback that they have received is that it would be great if they could have somewhere to have their coffee and overlook the park, because it is the most sort of beautiful aspect of the building. And overwhelmingly, this is parents who want to have a coffee and be able to watch their kids play in the park. But again, it has the benefit of providing surveillance, activation over the park itself, as well as the community garden. And to top it off, the ground floor or the lower level of the facility that is accessed from the park is also set aside for community purposes. So as I mentioned in my statement last week, we do just have one minor request regarding the officer's recommendation. And if I can again draw your attention to paragraph 15 of the officer's report, where the last sentence reads that council may wish to consider a rent-free period for the first year. We would really appreciate if council were to allow this, and it will just allow the proponents to get up and running and help with some of the initial outlay. So again, councillors, thank you for allowing us to speak tonight. We sincerely hope that you will approve this application in principle, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Will and Mr. Eriks. Are there any questions from elected members? Councillor Hamer.
Thank you, Mayor Vernon. I did have a question, actually. Did you have an estimate of what this extension will end up costing you to bring in those containers and fit them out and install them and whatnot?
Councillor, I actually don't. It might sound funny, but you think as a businessman I should have. I've looked at so many iterations of what to do there, and Trent come back to me on a number of occasions and says that won't be approved. At one stage, what I wanted to do was going to cost me just over $1 million, and it didn't bother me. I just want to have the best facility I possibly can to just make that part of Vic Park stand out, and that included rooftop yoga facilities and all this sort of thing. And Trent convinced me that we're not likely to get that one through, but the money I've spent on architects and designers to come up with how to make my building become an icon in the area and create more and more space and facilities for people to use. But this one is such a minor thing for the extension. I could guess $80,000. So it's not something I needed to get a quote on because it was inconsequential in the overall scheme of things. So I haven't priced up. Also, I want to leave it open for the admin staff to come back and say, can we do that and that and that and that and that? So why would I get too carried away with it? Because they're going to end up deciding how it looks and all that sort of thing. I'm just happy to do it. So I don't know what it's going to cost.
Anything further, Councillor Hamer?
No, that's it. Thanks for the answer. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Councillor Devereux.
Thanks very much for the interesting history that you bring to the table with your explanation as well. I really appreciate that. I just wondered whether you'd had any interaction directly with people in the community garden that are a part of the park. Thanks.
Yes, we have over the period. Initially, we had offered to use the water from our roof, considerable amount, as the water for the park, and the council looked at that and they basically said they didn't really need it. So I was involved in that aspect of it, and obviously the council wanted our thoughts on whether it should go ahead or not, or how we felt about it. Of course, we were totally supportive of it. The engagement we do have with them, Kerry, my business partner in the gym, he is involved with them quite a bit in helping him lift heavy stuff. So he's down there all the time saying to anyone who's down there, when you need anything heavy lifted, we all have a laugh about it because that's the only time they come and talk to us. But they're always calling us down there, and we have to get a group of guys to go down, and girls to go down and shift wheelbarrows that have been filled up and all that sort of thing. So that's the interaction we have with them. Of course, we talk to them because they're our neighbours, but that's the extent of our relationship with them.
I'll just add to that, Councillor, and just for full disclosure, we haven't had any direct discussions about this particular proposal, but we have had those kind of discussions with the town staff just to make sure the access to the garden is maintained and that there's a suitable degree of separation. We do actually hope there's some synergies with the potential ground floor space as well, but that will be something to explore in the future, I'm sure.
Thanks very much.
Are there any other questions from councillors for either of our deputation presenters? I'm not seeing any hands going up. I would like to inquire with regards to the proposal that you have for the space inside the container to be a community space. Have you outlined for the town staff the details of how you would propose that would work?
I might start. Yes, Mayor, we have, I guess, put forward a few ideas, I would call them. We haven't gone into any specific detail because we wanted to keep it open and kind of resolve that specific detail through a broader sort of what I anticipate would be a consultation exercise. Our view is that the proposal is kind of ideally set up for something like a community meeting facility, but we're by no means wedded to that as a specific outcome, and we'd be very happy to liaise with the town moving forward to determine the specific use.
If I can just also address that too, Mayor. I would like to see not-for-profits using it free of charge, and we can assist them with that. And I've actually been unofficially approached by people who think that it may be going ahead now, arts groups, Aboriginal arts in particular, about them coming there and just displaying their art, that sort of thing. And I've just said, look, it's really up to the council. We're happy to manage it, but it's, if the council says you can or can't do whatever, we're just going to go along with that. So again, I've not said anything to anyone. Firstly, we don't know if it's going to be approved, and secondly, we didn't want to have those discussions with council until we know it's approved, and then it's going to be, the discussion between us and council and exactly what everyone thinks is best for it to be used for.
Thank you. So your discussions with the town staff then so far, am I right in understanding, hasn't extended to things like insurance over the premises that will be contained in the sea container and on top of the sea container?
We have discussed insurance at a high level. We offered a commitment around the type of insurance that we would be comfortable with. And if you'll bear with me for one moment, I'm just checking the emails. Actually, it is listed in attachment 2 of the officer's report. And item number 9 was that we would seek public liability insurance consistent with the requirements for parklets or alfresco dining permits, which is up to $20 million.
So is that on the basis that you consider that anybody who used the top of the sea containers would be a member of the public essentially coming to the cafe or possibly using some of your other tenancies, but simply sitting in that seated area, and anyone from the community who would use the underneath area, that they're all to be considered just members of the public? Is that right?
That would be my expectation, Mayor, but I must admit I'm no sort of expert on the subject, and if that needed to be addressed more specifically in the lease, we'd see that as a potential option.
Okay. And you did mention before that, or I think Mr. Eriks did, about you would be, or he or his daughter would be managing this community space. How often do you think you would be proposing that the community space would be available? Like, how do you see that working? Would it be at the same times that the cafe is open? Would it be at different times? Would it be at all times?
Yes, we anticipate it would generally align with the times when the cafe is open. So we have offered that the proponent would take responsibility for opening and closing the facility, for example. There's the opportunity to have an online bookings forum of some sort, though that may be more appropriate via the town. And the proponents offered for sort of general cleaning and maintenance as well. But at this stage, Mayor, yeah, we would anticipate that kind of thing would align with the opening hours of the cafe and the building.
Okay, thank you. Look, I don't have any further questions, but I will just ask if there are any elected members who've got any questions remaining. No, I'm not seeing any indications. So, look, thank you both Mr. Will and Mr. Eriks for coming along and making a deputation to us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we will now move on to the next part of our agenda, which is item 10, the method of dealing with agenda business. So there is a recommendation, which I think is probably up on the screen right now. There were some changes to this particular item, and elected members might not have seen those changes because they were only foreshadowed earlier, I think possibly in the week. Unless anyone has any difficulty or an objection, could we potentially include item 12.4 into that, which is the event strategy? I know that some questions had been asked about that item at the agenda briefing forum, but I didn't understand that they were going to lead to any particular amendment or alternate. So I'm wondering if we can include that item as well. I'm seeing some general nodding, so nobody's indicating that they've got any objection to that. So I wonder if our minutes secretary would be able to put item 12.4 in. So that I then read it out, including that. Okay, all right, thank you. So the recommendation for the method of dealing with agenda business is that the following items be adopted by exception resolution and the remaining items be dealt with separately. Item 11.1, Council Resolution Status Report. Item 11.2, Advocacy Priorities 2022-23. Item 12.1, Metronet Management and Maintenance of Public Spaces Draft Position Statement. Item 12.3, Update on Policy 113 and the Homelessness Policy Implementation Plan. Item 12.4, Event Strategy. Item 12.6, Proposed Changes to Local Planning Framework Initiation Scheme Amendment. Item 13.1, Proposed Parking Restriction. Item 13.3, Aqualife Change Room Refurbishment. Request for Tender TBP 2205. Item 14.1, Financial Statements to April 2022. 14.2, Schedule of Accounts to April 2022. And item 15.4, Policy 223, Fleet Management Light Vehicles. Can I call please for a mover and a seconder for the recommendation? So moved Councillor Hendricks, seconded Councillor Devereux. Is there any dissent? There being no dissent, declare that carried unanimously. We'll now move on to the items in our agenda. Item 11 is the Chief Executive Officer reports, but items 11.1 and 2 have now been dealt with by exception resolution. Now move to item 12, the Chief Community Planner reports. Item 12.1 has been dealt with by exception resolution. Item 12.2 is a matter for which Councillor Hendricks has declared a financial interest, so he now needs to leave the electronic meeting room. Councillor Hendricks, you should have received an email with information advising you how to proceed out of the room. And I will ask for confirmation from our meeting support person, Ms. Louise, that Councillor Hendricks has already left the electronic meeting room, please.
I'm just scrolling through the list, Mayor Vernon. Yes, he has.
Thank you. So this is item 12.2 of our agenda, and it is the stage 2 initiation of Albany Highway Precinct Structure Plan. The recommendation is that Council 1 receive the Albany Highway Today and Albany Highway Tomorrow reports, being the major deliverables of stage 1 of the Albany Highway Precinct Structure Plan project. 2, support the key ideas identified within the Albany Highway Tomorrow report to guide the future stages of the project and address the major design elements of State Planning Policy 7.2, precinct design, namely A, a sustainable highway, B, a fine grain highway, C, a pedestrian highway, D, a connected highway, E, a diverse highway, and F, a distinctive highway. And 3, approve initiation of stage 2 of the Albany Highway Precinct Structure Plan, which will enable commencement of scenario and concept planning and the delivery of comprehensive community engagement to arrive at a preferred concept and draft precinct structure plan. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please, for the recommendation?
Still seeking a mover.
Moved Councillor Devereux, seconded myself, Mayor Vernon. Is there any dissent? No, there being no dissent, I declare that carried unanimously. Thank you. So at 7:30 p.m, can we please invite Councillor Hendricks to return to the electronic meeting room?
Yes, Mayor Vernon, I have done so. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just waiting till I can see evidence that Councillor Hendricks is back in the waiting room. There he is. Councillor Hendricks is back now in the meeting room, and so we have concluded item 12.2. So we now move on. Item 12.3 has been dealt with by exception resolution, as has item 12.4. So now move on to item 12.5, which is the proposed heritage list, local planning policy heritage list, and amendments to the local heritage survey. So the recommendation for this particular item is a little bit lengthy. It appears on pages 53 and 54 of the council's agenda. So I'm not going to read out all of the recommendation, but I will now call please for a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. Moved myself, Mayor Vernon, seconded Councillor Hamer. Now, I understand, I think, Councillor Hamer, you'd indicated that you might have an amendment for this item, and I think there might be some questions that you had. As the mover, I'm just going to speak very briefly about the item. I think this is an important step forward and body of work that's been done on behalf of the town. The introduction of a local heritage survey, which council has already previously adopted, signalled a change in local government approaches to how we capture the details and how we also reflect levels of recognition of the heritage within our own areas in built form, but also pleasingly, not just in built form, but in open areas and spaces. The heritage list, of course, is a different requirement altogether, but I think this is an important body of work, and I do wish to thank the town's administration and our consultant specialists on this matter for taking on board the queries that I raised on a previous occasion, and for investigating all of those claims to change the classifications to a higher classification for the properties that are listed in the second part of the recommendation. And although I remain a little disappointed that our Somerset Street pool did not get the thumbs up to move out of category 3 into a higher category, I think the fact that it's a town-owned asset means that it's one that we'll continue to cherish for years into the future. So I do commend this item to my fellow elected members. Councillor Hamer, as a seconder, did you wish to speak, or do you have a matter that you want to deal with first?
Thank you, Mayor Vernon. I did have an amendment, but I also had a question about that amendment. Should I ask the question first?
Let's deal with the questions first. Yes, please.
Sure. My question is, what are the consequences if the properties 72, 73 and 75 are removed from the heritage list?
Thank you. I direct that question to our Manager of Development Services, Mr. Cruikshank.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The consequence of removing properties from the heritage list or the proposed heritage list would be that those properties would not have any statutory protection. So I guess it's largely twofold. One would be that if those properties are not listed on the heritage list, then if a landowner proposed to demolish those buildings, then there would be no need for planning approval. So given there would be no need for planning approval, there would be no opportunity for the council to assess the merits of the retention of that particular building. The town would effectively be forced just to issue a demolition permit through a building process because there's no planning control if the properties were not listed. That's probably the main consequence. The other somewhat related consequence would be that if certain works were proposed to be done to those dwellings or buildings, if not listed on the heritage list, then those works could again effectively be undertaken without any form of planning overview or planning control. So they could be undertaken just subject to a building permit and without necessarily having regard to whether the works are complementing the existing building or detracting from the existing building. So as I say, largely it's a matter of removal of planning control and statutory protection if the properties are no longer listed.
Councillor Hamer, any other questions?
No, that was the main question. Do I move on to the amendment?
If you have an amendment that you wish to move, then yes, by all means.
Thank you. Amendment is, do I read the whole lot or just the bit that I'm adding?
No, you just need to read out the part that you're amending.
Okay, so I'm amending part 3 and I'm adding subject to the removal of the following places: place 72, 9 Teague Street, place 73, 13 Teague Street, place 75, 48 Teague Street. And the reason for that removal is that the owners of these properties have expressed very clear concerns in the submissions received that they do not wish to be included on the list. Also, both properties are not at any risk of, as they are being very well maintained by the owners.
Thank you, Councillor Hamer. Can I call please for a seconder for Councillor Hamer's proposed amendment?
Still seeking a seconder.
Seconded Councillor Devereux. Councillor Hamer, do you wish to speak now to your amendment?
No, nothing further. It's pretty self-explanatory. Yeah, we heard from the owners at the last ABF and that message was heard loud and clear.
All right, thank you. Councillor Devereux as the seconder, do you wish to be heard?
Just very briefly, Mayor Vernon, just to say I wanted an opportunity for this to be considered, but I also take on board the notes from Mr. Cruikshank about without the heritage listing, that there wouldn't be that statutory protection, and also not the need for a planning approval. That just would mean that broader consideration wouldn't be possible. So I think that is a serious consideration to take on board. Thanks very much.
All right, thank you. Is there anyone who, I haven't even got the words out of my mouth. Councillor Ive, do you have a question? Is that why your hand is up so quickly?
Yes, I have a question, Mevan.
Thank you.
My question is to Councillor Hamer. I'm sorry, maybe I missed this during the agenda briefing forum, but from my memory and my notes, we only heard from the owners of 13 Teague Street. And looking at the submissions, we hear from 13 and 48A Teague Street. I don't think I can see a submission from an owner of 9 Teague Street. Can you give me some clarification on that, please?
Councillor Hamer.
I think, are they one and the same? Are they two properties together, or?
Oh, Councillor Hamer, Councillor, I've asked you the question, so you are the one who needs to answer.
Just let me look at the attachment for the submissions again, sorry. Yeah, on attachment 12.5.4, 13 and 9 are both listed as Richmond Fellowship Community House. So I'm assuming they're the same location.
All right, Councillor Ike, that's the answer Councillor Hamer has for your question.
Thank you, but we haven't heard from the owner of 48 Teague Street except within the submissions. Is that your best recollection too, Councillor Hamer?
Correct, yeah, I'm referring to the submissions that were attached from the owners of 48 Teague Street, which were quite strong, but lined up with what we heard at the ABF.
Councillor Ife, anything further?
Not at the moment, thank you.
All right, thank you. So now call, I'm not quite sure, Councillor Devereux, if you were speaking in favour of the matter when you spoke as the seconder, or you were merely speaking as the seconder, but I'm going to follow the meeting procedure rules, where ordinarily I would call for someone to speak against the recommendation, but generally I'd be doing that because the last speaker had spoken for the item. Because I'm not sure whether you were speaking for the item, but you didn't say you were speaking against it, so I am assuming you were speaking for it. I am now calling for someone who wishes to speak against the amendment. I'm prepared to speak against the amendment. I'm not prepared to support the amendment because the officers did consider all of the submissions that were received, and they did still continue to recommend that these places be included in the list. And I think based on the elaboration of reasons by the Manager of Development Services, there are good and valid reasons why some of these decisions do sit with local government, because individuals who happen to own or occupy a premises for a period of time may come and go. And it is the local government that generally endures, and they're the ones who our community at large expects will be the protector when legislation permits us to do so, as certain properties, if they're deemed worthy, appropriate of inclusion in this list. This list is not of nearly the breadth of properties that we have in the town. It's a select few that have been chosen for good and specific reasons. And I am buoyed by the fact that inclusion in the heritage list does not mean that development in the future is prohibited. It just means that there is a more rigorous process than might otherwise be gone through. And it does also mean the town will have, hopefully, valuable information about when perhaps a property is about to be disposed of or developed, to the extent that we may be able to consider what steps, if any, can be taken through the development and planning process to ensure that we do get either some proper protection of those properties in the list, or that we ensure that the planning and development of those properties is done in a way that is sympathetic to all the rest of our planning policies and our strategies and our strategic community plan objectives. So for all those reasons, I won't be supporting the amendment. Is there anyone who'd now like to speak for the amendment? Anyone else who would wish to speak against the amendment? Councillor Karimi first, and then Councillor Ike.
Thank you, Mayor Vernon. To be honest, I have struggled with this, taking into account what the owners of the property at, I can't recall, I think it's 9 and 13 Teague Street did say in their deputation at a previous meeting. However, the comfort that I draw with supporting the substantive motion and not supporting this amendment is that anything that the owners may wish to do to these properties, they're not precluded from doing that. They just need to go through the rigour of that, development application and planning process, and that is to preserve and protect the historical importance and heritage of these buildings. At no time, based on what Mr. Cruikshank has said, are they going to be told, you can absolutely do nothing to these buildings. However, anything will go through that rigour, and it's for those reasons that I am comfortable to not support the amendment, but instead to support the substantive motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Croomy. Councillor Ivey.
Thank you, Mayor Vernon. I'm not supporting this amendment for two reasons. Firstly, that it lists a property that we actually haven't had correspondence on. 9 Teague Street may still be owned by the School of Philosophy nominees, but there has been no correspondence on that property with us. So I'm certainly not inclined to include that. I did have some sympathy with that organisation because they are a not-for-profit when they spoke to us 2 weeks ago. But again, the comments that Mr. Cruikshank made to reassure us that they do have the capacity to make improvements to their building, they just can't demolish it without permission, reassured me to the extent where I felt that we didn't need to move this amendment. So I think we've had the experience in the last couple of years of seeing what can happen to a much loved community building that isn't protected when the building quite a long way east on the highway that's best described as opposite Bravos, I think, was knocked down, and people were quite unhappy about that. And I think that we do need to see some protections of these significant buildings in our town. So I'm not willing to support this amendment. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ivey. Councillor Devereux, did you have a question? No? Can you please then, thank you, put your electronic hand down. Is there anyone else who hasn't spoken on the matter who wishes to be heard? No, in that case, I'll go back to Councillor Hamer as the mover of the amendment. Would you like to close the debate?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Vernon. Just looking at the listing for 48 Teague Street, it's listed as an interwar Californian bungalow. It just doesn't strike me as something that is rare or that needs to be protected in the town. It just seems to me that there's many good examples of this house which are all being looked after and loved. But maybe that's not how it is, but that's fine.
Thanks, Councillor Hamer. So I'll now invite all elected members to vote on the amendment. Declare the amendment lost. Those in favour, Councillor Hamer. Those against, myself, Mayor Vernon, Deputy Mayor Anderson, Councillor Hendricks, Councillor Ivey, Councillor Devereux and Councillor Croomy. So we now go back to the substantive item. I would like to move an amendment to this item. So I'm going to outline my amendment now. So I'd like to add a further point 8 to the officer's recommendation as follows. Requests the CEO to consider whether a review of the heritage list Local Heritage Survey and Local Planning Policy 43 should be included in the corporate business plan for the financial year ended 2028. The reason for proposing this amendment is simply to ensure consideration is given to whether it is appropriate to review these documents after 5 years. We'll just speak very briefly to, actually I can't speak briefly to it until someone else has seconded it. Silly me, getting ahead of myself. Can I call please for a seconder for the proposed amendment? Seconded, Deputy Mayor Anderson. So I'll now speak very briefly to my proposed amendment. I'm not suggesting that we would be conducting a review of any of these particular instruments within a set period of time. I do note that the predecessor to the Local Heritage Survey, which was the Municipal Heritage Inventory, had been around for a very long time and had not been reviewed. And when I say a very long time, I do mean more than a decade. Clearly, the heritage list is a newer mechanism that the town is now about to adopt. And the answer to my question that was raised at the agenda briefing forum was that legislatively there was no requirement for when local government should review these documents. And so I've tried to craft my amendment in a way that is flexible enough to see that when the corporate business plan is being prepared, whichever corporate business plan ends up including the financial year into 2028, because that may or may not be the next corporate business plan that we prepare, that some consideration will be given as to whether that should be a project for that year. And obviously that will be up to the CEO. And if it's not, it then might fall to a future council to give that consideration at a later stage. But I feel like if we do nothing now, it will probably just fall a little off our immediate radar, and we might not necessarily think about it in a few years' time for review. So I guess it's about creating a bit of a milestone to think about it. Deputy Mayor Anderson, did you wish to speak to the amendment as the seconder?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Can I ask an indication if there is any dissent to the proposed amendment? Because if there is, then I'll ask people to speak to that. I'm not seeing any indication of any dissent, so I'll formally ask, is there any dissent? No, there being no dissent, declare that carried unanimously. Thank you. So we now go back to the substantive item as amended. I've already spoken to the item. Councillor Hamer, you haven't spoken as the seconder to the item substantively. Did you wish to do so?
No, nothing from me. Thanks, Bevan.
Thank you. Is there any dissent? There being no dissent, declare that carried unanimously. Thank you. The next item on our agenda, 12.6, has already been dealt with by way of exception resolution. We now come to item 13, which is the Chief Operations Officer reports. Item 13.1 has been dealt with by way of exception resolution. Item 13.2 is proposal to dispose of a portion of Reid Park by lease. The recommendation for this matter does appear on page 82 of the agenda. The recommendation is that Council 1 approve in principle the proposed sea container concept at 500 Albany Highway, Victoria Park, subject to a legal opinion at the cost of the applicant and confirming to the satisfaction of the Chief Executive Officer that the concept can be accommodated on Reid Park within the deed of trust, and B, all required regulatory approvals from the Town of Victoria Park being successfully obtained and any conditions thereon being complied with by the proponent, including but not limited to any applicable requirement for development approval, building permit, environmental health approval, or other form or approval required by the town's local laws, or adopted policies of council, and C, the rent being set at fair market rental of $4,000 per annum plus GST plus outgoings. 2, authorises the CEO to advertise by public notice to invite submissions for the disposal of a 30 square metre portion of 500 Albany Highway, Victoria Park for a period up to 5 years by way of a lease under section 3.58 of the Local Government Act 1995 and refer any submissions back to council for consideration. 3, delegates to the CEO the authority to negotiate and enter into lease terms to give effect to the concept on terms satisfactory to the town's lawyers, subject to no submissions being received. 4, delegates to the CEO the authority to consent to the submission of a development application to give effect to the concept, subject to any modifications or amendments as determined appropriate by the town's administration for the final consideration and determination by council. 5, delegates to the CEO the authority to provide landowner consent to any subsequent applications for any applicable regulatory approvals from council required to give effect to the concept following the successful entering into of a lease agreement to the town's satisfaction and development approval being granted by the council. And 6, notes that the approval in principle of the concept does not create an agreement to lease or fetter the town's discretion in the exercise of its statutory functions. Can I call please for a mover and a seconder for the item? Councillor Devereux, you have your electronic hand up. Is there a procedural matter that you need to raise?
Sorry, Mayor Vernon, it was just I had failed to pick up on the impartiality interest at the start of the meeting, so I just wanted to flag that, which I've sent through to governance.
So because we're in the middle of the meeting, you will need to verbally give your declaration of interest now. So having sent it through to governance is an after the event thing. So would you like to say, do you have an interest to declare?
So as per other councillors, I also received email from the proponent about the matter, and that was what I wanted to declare. Thanks.
So you're declaring impartiality interest in this item?
Correct.
Thank you. All right, so I'm sure the Minutes Secretary can note that you've done that now at 7:57 p.m. So I am now calling for a mover and a seconder, please, for the item.
Still seeking a mover.
Moved Councillor Hendricks, seconded Councillor Hamer. Councillor Hendricks, do you wish to be heard?
Yeah, I think this is an exciting thing. It's going to make good use to the park, but I think it's got a lot of advantages. So I can see there being possible meeting rooms or a community room for whatever, a wide range of purposes. I don't think the sea container is going to look like a sea container. I think it's going to look quite classy and hopefully, like Mark said, an icon. And yeah, I think it's you've got the safety aspect for the park it's going to bring, and it's a dead corner of the park anyway. I think it's just got a lot going for it. So yeah. So just that's I'll leave it at that for the time being. Thanks, Mayor Vernon.
Thank you, Councillor Hendricks. Councillor Hamer, as the seconder, do you wish to speak to the substantive recommendation?
I did have a question, but Mr. Eriks did answer that in my rough estimates of what this would cost. He mentioned around the $80,000 mark, but I did have an amendment to try.
All right, please state your amendment and your reason.
Sure, my amendment is to 1, I'm adding part D. The first year of the lease is to be rent-free, provided that the applicant will be responsible for payment of any outgoings. And my reason is, as this modification will be of zero cost to the town, and is expected to make a positive contribution to the local place activation.
Thank you, Councillor Hamer. There is some more on the screen as part of your reason. There's a further sentence saying this should be encouraged. Do you want that to be part of your formal reason or not? Otherwise, it'll just be what you've said now.
Yeah, that's fine. We can leave it there. Thanks, Mayor.
All right, so if the minute secretary could ensure that that second sentence is removed, and you will need to amend the reason to include the other words that Councillor Hamer used.
Confirming I'll be using Councillor Hamer's words that he's spoken tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. So can I now call please for a seconder for this amendment? Seconded, Councillor Devereux. Councillor Hamer, do you wish to speak substantively to your amendment?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just briefly, I see this as a win-win, and if the town can encourage these kind of projects to get off the ground and obviously have no budget allocations to deliver them, this is great for everyone. And I do know the lady who works at the cafe. She's a young, hardworking lady, and this will definitely help that whole area, and I'm looking forward to seeing it get off the ground.
Thanks, Councillor Hamer. Councillor Devereux as a seconder, do you wish to be heard?
Thanks, Mayor Vernon. Just to say, clearly I support this amendment, and I support this innovative idea, which, as Councillor Hendricks has said, I think is quite exciting and really does provide an opportunity for place activation, which is something that is important to us in the town. So I think it's worthy of support. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Devereux. Deputy Mayor Anderson, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mayor. I believe that the applicant received a COVID grant from the town. Can I please have confirmation that they did receive this grant, and is it possible to find out what the amount was, please?
Thank you. I'm going to need to direct that question to the Chief Community Planner, Ms. Martin Good.
Through the chair, I'm sorry, I'll have to take that on notice. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Anderson, probably not the answer you were hoping for, because you probably want it to be relevant to this particular proposed amendment. Is that right?
Yes, I would. Look, that's, if the answer can't be forthcoming, then I have to accept that.
All right, thank you. So we've had two people, the mover and the seconder for this amendment, speak in favour. Is there anyone who wishes to speak against the amendment? Scrolling down my list. Look, I'll speak against the amendment. I'm not supportive of this amendment. I have heard the arguments that have been made in favour of it, and whilst the town is focused on encouraging place activation and supporting local businesses, irrespective of whether the applicant will be the one paying the cost of creating what is essentially a venture that is designed to support an existing business, if what is being asked for is exclusive use over a portion of the town's public open space, then I cannot see a basis for the town agreeing for that to be done for a period without the payment of a rental amount that the town has sought a valuation that suggests ought to be the fair commercial market rental for that space for the purposes of its establishment. If this is a project that the applicant is committed to, which they've indicated they are, then it's one that, because it would see a use of public open space given over to them by an exclusive lease, it is one that I consider that they should pay to see that established, noting that the market rental for that proposed space is $4,000 per annum. So I won't be supporting the proposed amendment for that reason. Is there someone who wishes to speak now for the item? Deputy Mayor Anderson, you have your hand up. Was that a question, or did you wish to speak on the item?
No, ma'am, I wish to speak against, but I will follow the process and wait and see.
All right, thank you. Is there anyone who would like to speak in favour? If no one else wishes to speak in favour and no one's indicating to me that they do, anyone to speak against? Deputy Mayor Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I will be speaking against the amendment. Look, there are many businesses in the town that do improvements and renovations and extensions, and it isn't to the cost of the town. We couldn't be giving discounts for all of those businesses who invest in their own business. It just wouldn't be viable. So in that instance, I won't be supporting the opportunity for the rent for free for 12 months. But also I have some concerns around the public space as well. It is a public use park and the zoning. I don't think that at this time it's appropriate to be giving that space to a business as such. And because of the zoning, I also wouldn't want to make a decision unless I had the legal advice, which I know is probably more in relation to the substantive motion. But it really concerns me that as an elected member, the information that we're provided, there's a process that we follow, and it's really important to have that in front of us so that we can make informed decisions moving forward. So my reasoning. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Anderson. Is there anyone who wishes to speak for the item? If there are no other elected members who wish to speak on the item, I'm now going to go back to the mover of this amendment, Councillor Hamer, to close the debate.
Thank you, Mayor Vernon. I understand that this is a in principle agreement. It's going to come back to council at another stage. So the legal advice and any other questions and whatnot will be able to be answered and gone through at that point. So any concerns you had then might be better answered at that point.
Thanks, Councillor Hamer. So debate is now closed. So I'll ask elected members to please vote on the amendment. So I declare the amendment lost. Those in favour of the amendment, Councillor Hamer and Councillor Devereux. Those against, myself, Mayor Vernon, Deputy Mayor Anderson, Councillor Hendricks, Councillor Ife and Councillor Karimi. So we now go back to the substantive motion before council. And we've heard from the mover, and the seconder was Councillor Hamer, who hasn't spoken on the amendment at this stage, but chose instead to move an amendment and speak on that. So I am going to go back to you now, Councillor Hamer, as the seconder of the officer's recommendation, and ask you, would you like to speak as the seconder on the recommendation?
Thank you, Mayor Vernon. Yes, I would like to speak in favour of this recommendation. The amendment would have been nice, but as it stands, it's good enough for me to push on through. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hamer. I have a couple of questions that I'd like to ask about this item, and I'm just checking because I believe those questions will need to be answered by the Manager of Development Services, Mr. Cruikshank. So these are questions that I would like to find out, get some confirmation from. The first one is to pick up Councillor Hamer's last point that he made during his closing debate on his amendment. He indicated that he understood this was just an in-principle matter and it would be coming back to council. My question for Mr. Cruikshank is, does the resolution require the matter of an in-principle use of a sea container at 500 Albany Highway, Victoria Park, to come back to council before the CEO in point 2 of the recommendation is authorised to advertise it to the public and before the other requirements in the remainder of the recommendation will take place?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think that question is actually better placed for Mr. Denham. I think Mr. Denham would have a better understanding of the recommendation and the process.
All right, thank you. Sorry, it was me putting it in the planning basket, so you're probably quite right. So I'll direct that question then to our Manager of Property Leasing Development, Mr. Denham.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Vernon. The recommendation obviously provides for a development approval to be sought, so that would potentially need to be referred through some sort of council process, which may or may not involve coming back to council. Mr. Cruikshank may be able to advise on that. But insofar as the leasing aspects are concerned, the recommendation is giving the Chief Executive Officer authority to advertise public notice to invite submissions for the for this proposed lease, and the lease itself would only come back to council if submissions were received and needed to be referred. If any submissions were received, in which event under the Local Government Act we would need to refer those back to council for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. My second question relates to point 3 of the recommendation about delegating to the CEO the authority to negotiate and enter into lease terms to give effect to, it uses the words, the concept on terms satisfactory to the town's lawyers, subject to no submissions being received. So I'm trying to understand what it is that the CEO would be given the authority to negotiate about, because the first part of the recommendation is that it's a lease. So it approves in principle the sea container concept, and so does concept in point 3 mean everything down to negotiations around the design of it, the use of the so-called community space? I mean, what's included? Because otherwise it's a sea container. I'm just trying to get a really good handle on what it is that this recommendation suggests we give over authority to the CEO to do, assuming that the legal advice says that the concept, meaning the sea container, can be accommodated on read part within the deed of trust, and assuming it appears that all the required regulatory approvals are obtained and that the rent is set at $4,000 per annum. So is there more to the concept that the CEO would be given the authority to negotiate over?
Thank you, Mayor Vernon. The concept currently comprises the proposal which the applicant has submitted and which is attached to the agenda, and does include a number of the applicant's commitments, and the concept itself would, its implementation would be subject to development approvals, building permits, and so on.
So on that basis, do I understand then that the delegation of authority to the CEO would be negotiation of all the lease terms that are not mentioned in the applicant's proposal that would be necessary to create a proper lease, as well as those features or items that are contained in the applicant's summary would be in as a minimum? Does that make sense?
Yes, Madam, it does, yes.
And my next question actually relates to point 2 of the recommendation. So is this on the basis that, assuming the legal advice comes back and says that this can be done, is it at that point in time, or is it after point 1B, that the town would advertise for expressions of interest for the public at large to participate in the C container proposal? Or is it would be at large for anyone who wanted to do something on the same piece of land for which the applicant might be one of those parties that might express an interest, and their interest will be the C container proposal?
Mayor Vernon, the intention is that the advertisement would be made for this concept, which has been worked up by this proponent and is unique to this proponent who owns the adjacent property, which this concept is conceptually tied to, if you like.
Okay, thank you. So it is just, I'm just clarifying that what we'd be giving notice of is for people to put in submissions about this proposal from this applicant with what they've set out so far.
Yeah, correct, Mayor Vernon, yes.
And so if it were the case that there were no submissions, that's when the town CEO would be given the authority to go ahead and start negotiating lease terms. Is that right?
Correct, Mayor Vernon, yes.
And so if there were no submissions, there wouldn't be a need for the matter to come back to council unless it were around the development application. Is that right?
Correct, Mayor Vernon, the development application, or indeed if some other regulatory approval for whatever reason would need to come back, but the lease itself would not need to come back to council, provided it was negotiated within what is envisaged in this recommendation and concept.
All right, thank you. So if the legal advice were to come back and said that this could be accommodated within the deed of trust, that would suggest that there were no amendments required to the deed of trust. But if the legal advice came back and confirmed that the concept could be accommodated, but not within the existing deed of trust, but within amendments to the deed of trust, would that then mean that all of the rest of the points of the recommendation fall away, and we would have to look at bringing the proposed amendments to the deed of trust through to council before we could go back to considering this?
That is correct, Mayor Vernon, yes. To pursue a modification of the deed of trust, would be a lengthy process that would involve, according to our legal advice, going to the Attorney General and potentially to the High Court or the Supreme Court.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate you answering my questions. I'm sorry that there wasn't time to give you more notice of those questions. So look, I'm prepared, having just asked those questions, to speak in relation to this matter. I'm not going to support the officer's recommendation. I feel like there are a couple of fundamental points that cause me discomfort. The first one is about the disposal of some public open space at a park like Reid Park. I don't consider this is akin to the most recent disposal of public open space in the town at Edward Millen Park, where we went out to the market and called for expressions of interest for people who would like to develop a portion of our public open space at Edward Millen House. And then we did an assessment of the various different expressions of interest and looked at how we might best be in a position to affect that. Whilst it is true that the successful proponent in that case that was approved by council was proposing a significant activation of a heritage listed building, that the town would otherwise have some challenges if it were to try to restore that building itself, let alone otherwise activate with buildings and the like on some of the space available within the Edward Millen Park precinct. And although this is a much smaller proposal, I remain uncomfortable about the idea that we would be extending an existing business on private property into a portion of Reid Park in circumstances where we don't know if this is something that can be done within the deed of trust. And if it can't be done within the deed of trust, I would have felt more comfort to have known what that would have been before we ever got to this stage. But it does seem that without being able to reach an agreement between the town and the applicant over the last 8 or 9 months worth of negotiations, it's come down to it being presented to council for our approval in principle of a concept that isn't completed at this stage in order to have the applicant pay for the costs of the legal advice before we would go further forward. I also have some concerns about the concept of some part of the sea container proposal being available for community space and use by community groups. It is a great idea in principle, but we've seen great ideas in principle that didn't actually come to pass. There is one great idea in principle that is still awaiting its completion date and its availability to the community. And it went through a planning process which resulted in a space in a privately constructed building being set aside for community use to be managed by the town. And unfortunately, even though that space has been built and constructed now for 4 years, it's still not available to our community because of what have become intractable, bogged down negotiations between the town and the owners of that building as to how and the terms on which the community space will be made available for community groups to use. I have some further concerns, having heard from the applicant's deputies tonight, that it's intended that this community space is effectively going to be open in alignment with a cafe's opening hours. Those opening hours may not be opening hours that are actually the best for the community members who might wish to use a space like this. So I feel like there is quite a lot of work that would need to be done to turn this project into a reality. And I'm not saying that the applicant doesn't have the will to do that, because they've demonstrated they've got a significant level of commitment in that regard. But I remain with some significant reservations about the appropriateness of this. And for those reasons, much as I enjoy ideas of activating our public spaces, I'm afraid on this occasion I can't support this proposal at this point in time. Is there an elected member who would now like to speak for the officer's recommendation? Councillor Karimi.
Thank you, Mayor Vernon, and thank you for raising all the matters that you have just raised. Whilst I do share similar concerns, I take comfort in the recommendation being that it's an in principle approval, so that further advice in terms of the legal opinion and looking at all the required regulatory approvals and so on and so forth can be looked into. And it's on that basis that I will be supporting the officer's recommendation, because I think it is a wonderful progressive idea and I would like to see where it could go. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Karimi. Is there anyone who would like to speak against the officer recommendation? Is there anyone else who would like to speak for the officer recommendation? Councillor Devereux.
Thanks, Mayor Vernon. I appreciate the points that have been raised, but I also really do see this as a real opportunity for innovation. Sometimes that comes with a few complications, but I think the value that's articulated quite strongly, I think, in various parts of the report for the value or community benefit from this initiative in terms of safety, in terms of amenity from the park, and a number of other elements, I really strongly agree with. And I also firmly believe that mixed use can really help activate a space. And so having that sort of mixture of something commercial, but also a genuine community interest in having part of that also available to the public, I think is a real opportunity. There's a really nice interface with other opportunities, with other community activities like the community garden. I think it really opens up all sorts of opportunities, and I'd love to see this be able to proceed, and noting as well the caution, as some others have said, that yeah, we have another chance to consider this down the track, but I really think it would be a shame to lose this opportunity as a sort of a partnership, in a sense, between the private sector and the council and the community. So I affirm it and hope that it's successful. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Devereux. Is there any other elected member who wishes to speak on the item? If not, I'll go back to Councillor Ith.
Thank you, Mayor Vernon. I felt like everyone else had a go, so I'll speak very briefly. I spent considerable time on this, including standing on Albany Highway and looking at Reid Park for long periods of time. People must have thought I was a bit strange. I am going to support the officer's recommendation after much thought, and my reason behind that is that I think that this could look fantastic. It could be a really interesting and useful thing. I would have really liked to have seen the legal advice before this coming to council, and I'm quite disappointed we didn't get that opportunity. But I feel that I would like to see that legal advice, and I'd like to see this progress before we can make a proper decision. I don't want to shut off the decision yet. Notwithstanding the fact that a legal opinion earlier would have been preferable to many of us, I'm still prepared to support the officer's recommendation on this matter.
Thanks, Councillor Ith. Is there anyone else who hasn't spoken who wishes to be heard before I go back to Councillor Hendricks as the mover for closing the debate? No, in that case, Councillor Hendricks, do you wish to close the debate?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Vernon. So I agree with Councillor Hamer said. It's a win-win for the community and I suppose for the business itself or the proprietor. Like you say, it's in principle. The whole reason to do this is because Mark didn't want to spend any more money on the legal opinion if the council was going to knock it back. So and that's that's why it's before us now, and I think it's good to get that legal opinion, and that's why we should vote for it. The other thing too is, I suppose once we've got that legal opinion and once it's advertised to the public, I think it's good to get the public sentiment on this. If they feel we shouldn't be using the park for this purpose or not, I think it's something I think that it'd be good to get feedback from the community as well before we make the final decision. I think Karen, you mentioned about disposal of public open space. I think where it's going, it's a dead pocket. And I think it's, what's proposed is going to really, like Mark said, almost be an icon, or what was mentioned earlier, that it'll be an icon, and I think it'll look quite good, and it's a win-win for both parties. I think the benefits far outweigh if what we're going to get, rather against if the park was left as it is now. And also, I think Mark has already demonstrated willingness to cooperate. I'm not sure if the room had to be used in evenings or whatever. I'm sure that there'll be a way around that. So all in all, I think I urge fellow councillors to support the officer's recommendation on this one. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hendricks. If elected members could now please vote. Declare the recommendation carried. Those in favour: Councillor Hendricks, Councillor Hamer, Councillor Ife, Councillor Devereux, Councillor Creamy. Those against: myself, Mayor Vernon, and Deputy Mayor Anderson. Thank you. We'll now move on to the next item on the agenda. Well, actually, before we move on to the next item on the agenda, I note that the time is actually 8:30 p.m, so we have been sitting for 2 hours. That is roughly our time for taking a break. So I'm assuming elected members would appreciate if we took a short break. I'm thinking so that there's enough time for people to do things 10 minutes at this point in time. So if I could move, please, that we adjourn the meeting at 8:32 p.m. For a period of 10 minutes. While our minute secretary brings that up, can I call please for the reason is just to have a break. Can I call please for a seconder for my motion? Seconded, Councillor Hamer. Is there any dissent? No, there being no dissent, declare that carried unanimously. Thank you. So it's now 8:32 p.m. and we're adjourned. Elected members and town staff, please turn off your microphones, turn off your cameras. And we will see you back here at 8:42 p.m. Thank you. It's now 8:42 p.m. and so we'll now be resuming our meeting. Just need to confirm that we've got all elected members back. We're waiting on Councillor Hamer. Not sure, Councillor Hamer, if you can hear this. You probably can't. But it's now 8:43 p.m, so we are going to be resuming, noting that Councillor Hamer is absent at this point in time. So the next item on our agenda is item 13.3, which has already been dealt with by exception resolution. So then we go to item 14, which is the Chief Financial Officer reports, and items 14.1 and 14.2 have been dealt with by exception resolution. We come now to item 15, the committee reports. 15.1 is review of policy 115, public art. Note that Councillor Hamer has come back in at 8:43 p.m. The recommendation for item 15.1 is that Council adopts the amended policy 115 public art as attached, subject to the following changes. 1, to clause 5 of the policy statement, after the word artwork, place a comma followed by the words inverted commas created by a professional artist, closed inverted commas followed by another comma. And 2, remove the first dot point under point 3 of the policy definition. Can I call please for a mover and a seconder for that recommendation?
Still seeking a mover. Still seeking a mover.
Moved myself, Mayor Vernon, seconded Councillor Karimi. Before I speak to the item, I wish to move a procedural motion on this item. Procedural motion is that Council refers this item back to the Policy Committee by December 2022 to consider whether the public art policy should include a formal process for the Public Art Advisory Committee and panel, the connection to the public art strategy, and how the town curates, displays, and promotes its public art collection. And the reason for moving the procedural motion is to ensure, because the policy doesn't cover these issues either at all or in any depth. So can I call please for a seconder for the procedural motion? Seconded Councillor Karimi. Because it's a procedural motion, have given a reason for it, and we don't have debate on procedural motions, only voting. So I now ask elected members please to vote on the procedural motion. Declare that carried unanimously. Thank you. Now go on to the next items on the agenda. Item 15.2, which I thought we dealt with in exception resolutions, but I must clearly be wrong about that. If we go forward then to item 15.2, it's a review of policy 226 recreation reserves hire. The recommendation is that council adopts the amended policy 226 recreation reserves hire as attached. Can I call please for a mover and a seconder for that motion?
Still seeking a seconder.
Moved Deputy Mayor Anderson, seconded Councillor Hendricks. Deputy Mayor Anderson, did you wish to be heard?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Hendricks is seconded. Do you wish to be heard?
No, thank you, Mayor Vernon.
Thank you. Is there any dissent? There being no dissent, declare that carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 15.3, review of policy 405, events on parks and reserves, notification to local residents. The recommendation is that council adopts the amended policy 405, events on parks and reserves, notification to local residents as attached. Could I have a mover and a seconder for that, please? Moved myself, Mayor Vernon, seconded Councillor Hamer. I don't wish to be heard. Councillor Hamer, do you wish to be heard?
No, thank you, Mayor Vernon.
Thank you. Is there any dissent? No, there being no dissent, declare that carried unanimously. Item 15.4 has already been dealt with by exception resolution. Item 15.5 is the review of policy 301 purchasing. The recommendation is that council adopts amended policy 301 purchasing as attached. I call for a mover and a seconder, please, for that recommendation.
Still seeking a mover. Sorry, my seconder moved to my mover. Can I please seek a seconder?
Moved Councillor Hamer, seconded Deputy Mayor Anderson. Councillor Hamer, did you wish to be heard?
Nothing from me. Thank you, Mayor Vernon.
Deputy Mayor Anderson, did you wish to be heard?
Nothing from me. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I wish to move a procedural motion in relation to this matter. The procedural motion that I wish to move is that council refers this item back to the policy committee by October 2022 to consider improvements to procurement of local goods and services, environmental sustainability and social sustainability. And the reason is that the policy could do more to cover these issues. Could I call for a seconder, please, for this matter? Councillor Devereux, you have a question?
I did have a question, Mayor Vernon. Is now the right time for that? I wasn't sure if it was after the second or before.
I did need to get a seconder to actually get it on the table, because if it didn't get on the table, there's no questions to be asked about it, but it has a seconder now in Councillor Carini. Do you have a question, noting that we don't debate procedural motions, but if you've got questions, you can certainly ask them.
Thanks, Mayor Vernon. I did just have a question, just because I think I was thinking a little bit along the lines you were, and I was just wanting to check on something that was mentioned in the report, where they had said in point 2 that there was a need for review to return to the question to include more consideration of sustainability. But I noted that they added substantially to the existing policy points 17 to 22, which made me wonder whether they had some urgency to get that in place, and hence had suggested coming back later to the sustainability things. So I just wanted to ask if there was an urgency to those additions, and hence the suggestion to come back later to the other, rather than just leave it all together, if that makes sense. I refer to the mention of establishment of panels for pre-qualified suppliers, those points 17 to 22.
Thank you, Councillor Devereux. I'm just endeavouring to find the right person to direct your question to. Thank you. Just direct this question to the Acting Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Ellis, unless you tell me that Ms. Ersic, our Acting Finance Manager, will deal with this question.
Thank you, Mayor Vernon. I can take the question. Councillor Devereux is quite right. We are hoping to get this in place sooner rather than later to allow us more flexibility with panel suppliers. And as indicated, we did foreshadow that we would be doing more work on it, and to get it back to council for a further review as soon as possible.
Councillor Devereux, anything arising out of that?
No, thanks. That clarifies my query.
Thank you. In that case, I'll just ask a question of Mr. Ellis. When is it that the town would propose to have this policy come back to the policy committee if it were to be amended tonight? Because there's no indication of when.
We could commit to that same date of October.
All right, thank you. So look, based on that, I'll withdraw my procedural motion and I'll move an amendment to the officer recommendation. So the amendment that I'll move to the officer recommendation is to add a second point to the recommendation, point 2. So it should read that Council 1 adopts amended policy 301 purchasing as attached, and 2 request the CEO to refer policy 301 back to the policy committee by October 2022 to consider improvements to procurement of local goods and services, environmental sustainability and social sustainability.
Just one moment.
Thank you. So my reason for moving this amendment is to ensure that this policy comes back to the policy committee as soon as possible to consider some significant improvements to the policy while still allowing the proposed amendment to go ahead with effect immediately in the meantime.
Just a moment.
All right, thank you. Can I call for a seconder, please, for my proposed amendment? Seconded, Councillor Karimi. I don't wish to be heard further on the amendment. Councillor Karimi, did you wish to be heard?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Is there any dissent? Not see any indication of dissent. So there being no dissent, I declare that carried unanimously. Thank you. We now move to item 16, applications for leave of absence.
Sorry, presiding member, that was the amendment. We need to deal with the substantive.
Oh, sorry. Yes. So the amendment is carried unanimously. So now go back to the recommendation as amended. Is there any dissent? No, there being no dissent, declare that carried unanimously. Thank you. We now move on to item 16, applications for leave of absence. The recommendation is that council approves the leave of absence. One, Councillor Peter Devereux for the dates of 9 July to 23 July 2022 inclusive. And secondly, Councillor Bronwyn Ife for the dates of 11 July 2022 to 18 July 2022 inclusive. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please, for the recommendation?
Still seeking a seconder.
Moved Councillor Karimi, seconded Deputy Mayor Anderson. Is there any dissent? There being no dissent, congratulations, both of you get to go on leave. Declare that carried unanimously, thank you. Now move on to item 17, motion of which previous notice has been given. We have none. Item 18, questions from members without notice. Are there any questions from elected members without notice? Not seeing anyone's hands going up, so I'm going to take it as read that no one has any questions without notice. Let's move to item 19, new business of an urgent nature introduced by decision of the meeting. We have none. Item 20 is public question time. Leave, we don't have any external attendees from the public in our meeting. So at 9:01, I declare our public question time closed. Item 21, public statement time. Again, as there are no members of the public present, I'll declare public statement time closed at 9:01. Item 22, matters for which the meeting may be closed to the public. We have none. And so at 9:01 p.m, I declare council meeting closed. Thank you, everyone. Thank